My name is Tom. This is Three Basket Living, and I'm going to try to explain and show how I go about keeping my garden weed-free, or pretty close to it, in a no-till style, wood chip covered, back to Eden garden. People have asked me, how can I have so few wood chips when I cover my garden and have next to no weeds at all? So I'm going to show you the tools that I utilize and the best practices and the best tips that I have if I ever get a break from this stuff. And don't forget, if you're new to this channel and just come across this video, if you see anything or hear anything that is edifying or beneficial to anybody else, just please pass it along and share the information. So first and foremost, the thing I want to remind people of, but I don't want to harp on in this video, is the preventive maintenance. I've covered it in other videos when it comes to dealing with weeds in the garden. Number one is, I can't stress enough, is trying to get out of the habit and the practice of bringing the seed in your garden yourself with grass clippings, hay, and straw. We've all done it. I've done it myself, but it just doesn't make sense to bring something into the garden that potentially, or more than likely, has grass seed in it, or the hay and the straw. So why would you do that? Why do we want to, introduce that stuff if we're trying to minimize it or get rid of it? It'd be equivalent to me throwing a bunch of turnip seeds, a handful of turnip seeds out here on my garden soil, and not expect or anticipate turnips to grow. Number two is our practice of weed eating and mowing around or in the vicinity of our gardens. Just being mindful of the discharge, where our weed eaters and our mowers are shooting or discharging the grass and weeds that we're attending to outside of the garden. You may want to do things like put a little 2-foot barrier up around your garden. It's not going to eliminate it completely because you can't control the wind, but it can greatly reduce it. And another thing would be putting a bagger on your mower if you have that capability. But whatever you do, don't bring them into the garden. I'm going to keep hounding on that. So the third thing when it comes to preventive maintenance is addressing the potential seeds of grasses and weeds in your garden soil. My preference is solarization. I discussed that in previous videos. I will do that off season and pre-planting for the upcoming growing season if I don't have my head up my butt and forget or get complacent and lazy. All right, so how I keep my garden pretty much weed-free or under control anyway, where I have minimal weeds coming up through my wood chip covered garden, is by hand picking. That is my primary method. When I come out here on my garden every single morning and it's covered in my 2, 3, maybe 4 inches of wood chips, it takes me about 15 to 20 minutes leisurely with a cup of coffee in my hand, and I hand pick. Now let me show you what I do. I just reach down. That requires bending or squatting, which is a good thing because it's movement. Movement is exercise, and exercise is beneficial and healthy for us. Folks, if you're trying to get away from any labor at all when it comes to gardening, I think you're going in a backwards direction, in my opinion. Think about when your spouse or your children put you in an old folks home, a nursing home. You know what? You're going to be under the direction of a activities director. You know what that activities director is going to try to get you to do? He's going to try to get you up and out of a chair, up and out of a chair. It's going to try to get you to bend over, touch your toes, or as far as you can go, and come back up. Why? Because it's beneficial and healthy for you. So don't try to avoid all the bending and squatting. It's a good thing. But anyway, so I come out to the garden, I got a coffee cup in my hand, I reach down, when I bend over, I pull a weed up. Look at there. You know what I do with it? I give it a shake and I throw it down. Now notice, I just threw it on this little pile of wood chips that I just brought in here. That right there is all I do to control my weeds and grasses in my wood chip covered garden. What if you got a lot of weeds and grasses growing up through your wood chips, as I got right here? I don't have my garden covered in wood chips, but I got a lot of grasses and weeds or undesirable plants coming up in my garden. I want to point something out here. If I did the same thing what I did there, if you notice when I pulled it up, take this weed here. What's it got here? You see this? What we'd call that is a root ball. And if I took this in my current situation and I threw this down on the ground like that, what's going to happen is that weed or grass is going to keep on growing. And the reason is because of that root ball. Inside this root ball here, there's a lot of food for this plant, nutrients. There's a lot of microorganisms still within this root ball. And look how long and healthy them roots are right there. This root ball, just like a tree that's been blown over by strong straight line winds during a storm, it doesn't snap or break, it's just blown over and it gets uprooted. Because of all those nutrients and microbial life still going on in that root ball, it's still feeding the plant. And if there's any moisture available to it, through the humidity, the morning dew, a light sprinkle, maybe even your own watering on your garden, you're still supplying everything that plant needs to thrive and survive. Because what I have found out is that these roots, if they come in contact with this rich, organic, healthy soil, just like those trees that have been blown over and still live and survive and bloom year after year, I got them on my property, those roots are quick to start driving themselves back into the soil, into the ground, and they'll just keep on going. So this ain't a very good practice in my current situation. So you shake it, you drop it, and the benefits of dropping it on top of your wood chips when you have them covering your garden is that there is a barrier between that rich, organic, moist soil underneath the wood chips or the roof and the roots of that plant. So when the sun does come out, it eventually dries off, dries up, everything goes dead because microorganisms, fungi, mycelium, they still need moisture. So it'll dry up pretty quickly. So let me show you what I'm going to do, or what I would do, if my wood chips were on the garden, about 3 to 4 inches thick, and I had this kind of growth coming on. Okay, so when someone thinks about transitioning and going over to a no-till style of gardening, a wood chip covered garden, they have already inherently made a decision to remove the usage of plows and tillers. That was a big part of the arsenal when it comes to combating weeds in your non-covered or bare soil gardening methods. People just let them grow, and at the end of the season they till it all in. Well, in doing so, what they're doing, they have tilled and plowed all those seeds from those grasses and weeds back into the soil. Biggest tip I can give you is make sure you address that. Pull those weeds, utilizing tools or your hands, bending and squatting before they go to seed. That is the key to my success in my covered wood chip garden. Okay, now I'm going to give you the other option besides the hand picking. When I go to utilizing tools and I get an abundance of weeds and grasses, what I would do. and what I do now, and I'm going to be doing here in a little bit. And that is the utilization of a band hoe. And I'm not talking about your 1980s big hair rock band groupie. Not that kind of hoe. I'm talking about this right here, or something like it. This is what I refer to as a band hoe. Now there's several names to these things. Some call it a loop hoe. And basically what it is, you got metal here, all right? About an inch, maybe an inch and a half wide, depending on the brand that you come across, but they all operate in the same manner. On each side of this band, this piece of metal, is a knife edge. So what this thing does, it goes through down into the soil, and you just work it back and forth, and it cuts the roots off to that weed or grass or plant and just leaves it lay. Now, all that material, especially on your bare soil garden floor, it travels through here. So you're not moving and displacing so much material when you're cutting that root off at the base of it. Now this particular model, or this particular brand here, or style, is not very good for me when I got my wood chips on my garden, because it's too narrow. What I mean is it's only about 5.5 inches across down at the bottom, and then it tapers up to about 3 to 3.5 inches up top. So when I got wood chips, the wood chips don't flow through here too well. This is my handheld model, and this is what I would use to go in between my plants of my rows. Let me show you something here. Now this is a band hoe as well, what I call, or a loop hoe, and you can see the difference here in how it's designed here. Now this here is an attachment to my wheel hoe. I guess it's what it would be if the hoe's attached to it. If the cultivator's on it, it would be called, I guess, a wheel cultivator. But anyway, you can see the difference in just how it's done. See how much deeper the throat is and how much wider, and it doesn't taper in so much. So this on my wheel hoe works wonderful and beautiful throughout the garden, with wood chips and without wood chips. I don't have this on my wheel hoe right now, but I got my 12-inch. This one here is about 8 inches wide, and the legs or supports of it are pretty much straight up and down. They taper in a little bit, but it's so high that all the wood chips just flow right through it. Okay, so if I got a lot of weeds to deal with, let me show you. I started on this, and then it started raining on me again, so I had to stop. So if you'll notice here, I'm going to just take it, and I'm going to push down as hard as I want. The harder I push down, the deeper it goes. And I don't need to go that deep with this stuff. So what I do, and I can go slow, and if you see the dirt and the material just flow right through it, and what's happening, that knife on this hoe is cutting them. And I can run it backwards just to make sure. Now, it looks like a lot of those weeds and grasses are still intact. But it's all it is. I can do it as much as I want. And it only takes really one pass to cut through. This thing here, I don't know if you can see it here. It looks like it's still, nothing happened to it. But it is just sitting up front, and the roots got cut off here. Now, the issue that I do have, you can't see me here, the issue that I do have without my wood chip covering is that when I do this, these things have all these root balls on them, and they still have some root intact on them. And if it gets a little moisture through the night, through the humidity and the morning dew, a little sprinkle, these roots are quick to reestablish in my garden soil. But I've certainly disrupted their growth pattern and probably slowed down their ability to go and flourish and go to seed. But they eventually will, because I can come out here the next day or two and see these things continue to grow, and I tug up on it, and I have to pull the roots out of the soil because they've taken a grip again. But if this were in my soil, in my wood chips, and I come up through and I just maneuver my wheel hoe up and down a little bit, it pulls it out and everything, and this is sitting on top of my wood chips. So when the sun does come out, it may survive a little bit and still look green for the next day or so, but when the sun does come out, it dries up the root ball, and where there's no moisture, there's no life. And they don't have as quick of access to this rich organic material underneath your wood chip covering. So now what I want to do is show you a quick example of what I mean about that material being able to flow through that band hoe without these weeds being in here, because this is not in my garden. This is just a pile of wood chips here that would be a good representation if I did have my garden covered this year. Let me show you how it works. So I just come in here, and as I go through here, you see how the wood chips pretty much just flow through. So if I had weeds in there, it would just cut them off at the top, and as I pull through, if I got a weed, all I got to do is pop it up and bring it to the surface, and I can still use my wheel hoe to smooth things out if I wanted to. So after showing you that, if you can imagine my garden being covered in the wood chips, I'm coming down a row of beans. Now, I'm using a bare surface, but all I got to do is come through here and just very easily, in just about one pass, and dislodge all them weeds and cut them at the roots. Now in this garden this year, I'm going to have to stay on top of this because I don't have my wood chip covering. So a lot of these things are going to want to re-root. Now it's not very easily usable coming in between the plants within the rows, but getting in between the plants is where the hand model is very beneficial. Fast, effective, efficient. If you're going to change your gardening method to this type of method, and I highly encourage people to do so, especially for you preppers, all those that are being a little bit more mindful of the possibilities of the shit hitting the fan or the sugar hitting the fan, you need manpower tools. It's a good idea to get used to not having a tiller and plows and tractors. I do 4,000 square foot. I know it's not a whole lot, but it's more than enough to feed me. Plenty more, and probably a few neighbors. So to answer the emails, and I think it was a very good email, thank you, sir, because I really didn't show how I had such a, I think what he said, pristine looking no-till garden without having 12 inches thick suppressing weeds. How did I manage that? Bottom line is, I handpick leisurely with a cup of coffee in my hand, and going through the protocols and paying attention to the preventive maintenance things that we talked about earlier, and the band hoe, loop hole, wheeled model, and handheld model. I got to look for me a better handheld model, or I'm going to have to make one, because this one isn't no good with the wood chips in the garden. Right now, it's serving its purpose, so I keep it around. And it might be good on some other areas, beds that don't have the wood chips. So that's how I do it. And I've been successful at it. I know it's hard to believe that with all the crap I got growing on right now, but it ain't gonna take me no time to deal with this. If it was helpful, you think we're going in the right direction, let me know by giving me a thumbs up down below. It's a little indicator. But all I ask you to do, if it is beneficial and helpful, pass it along, share it with somebody else. Have a nice day. May all your branches become full of fruit, and I'll see you next time. Hua!